Alright, so this is the very last day of the NSET classes, day 10. And basically, the aim of this day is to just recap all the basic concepts of the three main parts of the test: listening, reading, and writing. But actually, we don't have a lecture on speaking in this part because presumably the most important parts have been given already during the previous discussions, and that in the writing part later, we will just be focusing on the essay part. That is because between the letters and the essays are definitely a much tougher task for especially general training students to complete. And so we will be focusing a lot on that later between these times over here. Now, before anything else, though, just ensure that this schedule over here is the one that's being followed. In the handout that was previously given, the one with the schedule, the two-page PDF file, this isn't the schedule that was written, so please follow this one accordingly, and this will be the one that will be flashed at the beginning of the class. So when the class begins, we tell the students what the outlook is going to be, and that by doing so, they should be able to expect what's going to happen for the next 3 hours. So as they can see here, the first hour is devoted to reading, and the next 20 minutes to some listening. And so to start with the session, direct the students to the very last part, the last section of their book. It should be after the second green or red sheet, divider sheet that they have at the end, and the very first page after that second green or red sheet should look something like this. Okay, final briefing, and direct them to page 1 of that part of the book, because there we shall commence with the reading activity. Now, please do some board work initially on this part, because what we will be having for the most part in reading is basically true, false, and yes, no, not given questions. The main reason why true, false, and yes, no, not given items will be covered today, it is because from among the question types, this is the one of the most difficult things that the students encounter. And so you might want to write down some basic rule first on the board. You can use the notes over here, okay, at the bottom, so that you can have like a jumping board for the discussion. So by writing this note, you tell them what exactly should be used when they have to deal with true, false, or yes, no, not given questions. And that expectedly the answers will be sequentially presented, and therefore they have to make use of one reading method, and that's to skim. Now, before you volunteer these ideas, you might want to ask them the basic questions. For example, you might ask them, how do we expect the answers to be presented in a yes, no, or true, false, not given question? Naturally, students would say random or sequential, and then eventually you tell them that it's sequential. And therefore, since it is sequentially presented, you might ask a follow-up question. Ask them, therefore, what reading method do we have to use? Do we skim, do we scan, or do we read in verbatim? And so eventually they should be answering skimming. Lead them through this, and if they don't get it, then you say that they skim. So maybe you can ask another follow-up question. By skimming, what do we exactly do? So you might want to ask some ideas from the group, and then eventually, if they cannot get the correct answer, then you tell them that skimming is simply using keywords, and that the keywords are gotten from the question, and then those keywords from the question will help us know where in the text over here can the answer be found. So for example, the first drill here is like a warm-up activity, so you guide them in this part. You can do this as a class, so one by one you answer the items here at the bottom. So again, you direct them to the 5 questions here at the bottom. You might want to ask a student to read first, or you can do the reading first for the first question here. You read this and then you ask them, so what keyword do we use here in this particular item? So they might want to use the words muscle cells or even the number 50, because basically if we are using keywords, what we're looking for are principally names or numbers. numbers especially because they stand out in the text. So if they use number 50 here, they would normally, well, they would actually locate 50 over here. So which means the answer for number 1 should just be found over here. So if you want, you can now flash this slide, on the wall and then direct them to the clue. So the clue is over here. Now the words muscle cells are coded here and the number 50 is over here. So you let a student read this part of the text and then you ask them what is the answer for number 1. Okay, so definitely the answer should be false because the keyword here is until, which is different from, of course, the word before, from the word when we are 50 in this case. So that's what you do here. That's the kind of guided drill I'd like you to perform in this warm-up activity so that when they answer eventually the other test questions, they should know what to do. Now you can guide them further by reading the next question. So you might want to read question number 2 here. So a 40-year-old rower is just as likely to win a race as a younger rower. So they could look for the number 40 and the word rower. It's over here in this part of the text. So again, you ask them what's the answer. So the answer should be true. If you study the slides here, you would find that there is a basis, or there are some bases for all of the items over here. Okay, so this should last for about 5 minutes maximum. Then afterwards, you direct them to the next text, which is found on page 2 over here. And then you, again, reviewed with them the basic steps. So step number 1, look at the questions, look for keywords, and then locate those keywords in the text, and that expectedly the answers for these items here will always be sequentially presented. So which means they expect number 1 to be found at the beginning of the text, and the answer for number 7, oops, we go back there, the answer for number 7 should be found somewhere at the end. Now you give them 10 minutes to answer this set over here, and then you answer all together, and you can use this slide over here. Again, these underlined parts form the basis for the answer. If you take a look at the presenter notes at the bottom, you have the answers with some guide on some talking points you can use to justify certain answers over here. Now, the way to go here is to let the students now take turns reading the questions themselves. So there will be like 7 items, so maybe 1 student per item, and then you ask each student what is their answer. Now, before, however, you answer as a class within the 10 minutes in which they are answering, I recommend you move around and check their answers. You don't have to tell them that a particular answer should be something else. You can just let them know that they have to check, say, number 2, or certain numbers they get incorrect, or you can tell them that they have to go over this one item one more time and reevaluate their answers. And if they still don't get the correct answer, you can point to them the keywords or the clues in the text, and then from there you let them answer by themselves. And after 10 minutes, answer all together, and you should be able to use this guide over here. Now, the same should happen in the case of this text about the monarch butterfly. This is a longer passage actually, and then again, you give them about 10 to 12 minutes for this particular set. If you notice in the slide, there's this photo of the monarch butterfly here, so you can just flash this on the wall so they have an idea what a monarch butterfly looks like or how it looks like, and then you guide them or you direct them, to the questions found on page 4, right over here, and you give them 12 minutes to answer the questions. Now, the process is basically the same as what you have probably done in the previous set. the important thing is that you have given them an idea in the first set how it's done. You have reinforced it here, and so they can work more independently now for the last two sets of the test. Okay, so this is the third set of questions. This is of course after you answer and discuss everything here. The answer key is over here, by the way, so please study the slides and the basis for the answers. You direct them to the last questions here, of which the text is found in the next page right over here. Okay, so this plus together with the discussion and of course the guidance that you give them, this reading part should last for a maximum of 1 hour. And after 1 hour, you go straight to some listening activity over here. That's on page 6. The listening activity for this set is only very brief, and that is because what we have on pages 7 and 8 have been covered already during their final inputs, and that was because on day 9, that was their mock test 2, they had to deal with maps. And so you don't need to cover this already because these two drills over here have been covered already during day 8 of the discussion. So that means your listening discussion will be very, very short, and that's only for, oops, this part over here, okay, of the reading part, page 6, listening, I mean, just two sets of 10 items. Now, basically what these are typical section 4 questions. Now, we'd like to expose them to section 4 items because section 4 questions are the toughest of all the parts of the listening test. And so what you'd like them to appreciate is the typical format of a Session 4 questionnaire. Now, normally, a Session 4 listening test would have a completion format. So like in this case, we have complete the notes. Sometimes it could be complete the summary, complete the table, and there are always parts, multiple parts to be exact. So for example, in the first activity, you direct them to page 6, this slide, this part over here. You can flash that also on the screen if you wish. Here is your slide. So basically what you can do is direct them to the different parts of the test. So there is this overview about traditional Samoan houses, and the lady in this audio will first talk about the overall design, the roof, and then eventually the supporting posts. So you tell them that sometimes in section 4 the answers might be given too long, meaning between numbers there could be a long discussion or a long lull, for example, and sometimes students might feel that they might have lost the answers already, or perhaps they should be in another part of the listening test. But you tell them that their guide should be the headings, the titles over here. And that is because the titles indicate whether they are in a particular part of the test or otherwise already. So, in other words, once they hear the word roof, then they should be in number 4. And once they hear, say, the word posts, then they should be in number 7 onwards. Of course, since this is number 1, then they should watch out for the word design or even the words overall design. And then eventually, you would have to guide them one by one on what kinds of answers they expect for each item over here. So number 1, for example, is a shape. So what besides round will be quoted by the lady? Take note, this is the traditional Samoan houses. The house has no walls, and that since there are no walls, number 2 is used to shelter the occupants from the wind and the rain. And the floor is made of what? Blank. Number 3, to control temperature. Then you'd go through all of this. It would help that you listen to yourself, the audio, so you know what to say to your students. And once you're done with this part over here, you now play the audio, and then you play this all throughout up until number 10. Now, normally students don't get the answers correctly, and so my recommendation is that you repeat the audio and tell them that you will be flashing the answers as they are given. And if they happen to miss a particular item, just let them look down on the questionnaire, and then they only look up when they are already done with all the 10 items altogether. Okay, so as the audio is repeated and when the answers are provided, you flash them, right? So and then after that, you're done with the first set, and you do the exact same thing for the second set of section 4 questionnaire, still on the same page 6. Okay, so this part of the listening test should last for no more than 20 minutes. And after you're done with this listening part, you give them a 10-minute break, and then afterwards you proceed to some reading. Now, please listen to the audio yourself. You might want to write some keywords also as you listen, so that you can repeat the keywords that were quoted by the speaker in the audio. For this particular set, for instance, please let them know that sometimes the keywords are given after the answer itself has been given. So for instance, when you listen to number 3 over here, and I think some items over here at the bottom, number 3 especially, you would find that the words ochre, manganese oxide, hematite were quoted after number 3 has been mentioned. So please check it out yourself and see what I mean, so that you can always give your students some heads up, because this part over here can be a bit tough for the students. So again, do as you did in the previous step, and then once you're done with this part, you proceed to the break. That's for 10 minutes. All right. All right, so this will be the writing part of the discussion for day 10. This might take a while to be learned, but eventually, if you know how everything flow, this is actually one of the best lectures in writing that you as a teacher can give to your students about essay writing. And basically, you direct them to pages 79 and 80 of the book. This is towards the end, before the final input portion of the book is given. Basically, the goal of this drill is for students to be able to appreciate how to expand their essay, especially in the middle parts. And to start off your discussion, what you can do is flash them this slide. This is, by the way, slide number 17, I believe, or 16. You can please check it out. You flash this on the screen, I mean, and then you direct them to the different parts here and ask them what are the parts of the essay. So to guide them, ask them what this part is, and of course they should say is the introduction, and this part over here is of course the body paragraphs, and here at the bottom is naturally the conclusion or the summary paragraph. Now, emphasize that the purpose and the focus of the discussion is on the body, and direct them to the two parts here in the middle and ask them what is the method that they were taught when the body paragraphs are developed. They would have multiple answers, but eventually they should remember that they should have the tie method. They should use the tie method. And so in the past, they've learned that the tie method is basically the three parts of the body paragraph, and these three parts are represented by the topic sentence, the idea, and the elaboration. And the way it's done is this. So just a brief recap. So imagine this is the 4-paragraph format, and numbers 2 and 3 are the ones in the middle, the body paragraphs. This is how paragraph 2 would look like. So a zoomed in version of paragraph 2, the start would have the topic sentence and the idea that comes after which, and the elaboration is to help expand the first idea. Now another idea has to be provided, and just like what's done in the first idea, that too has to be expanded in some ways. All right. And so this means that for a paragraph to be developed, they have to have an idea. Okay. And so they need to be able to plan out ahead of time what ideas they have to use so that they know exactly what to write in their essay, and correspondingly expand their thoughts and help lengthen their work. Now, you might want to direct them to their handout that's on page 79 for them to appreciate what the TIE method is. So basically, this paragraph over here is a paragraph that discusses something about the internet. You can flash the next slide for that over here. And the first, or the text at the top, is the question itself. So you can read this question and then emphasize that the paragraph that's on their book answers the first question over here about what can be done, or what are the negatives of the internet. So the one on the board is the topic sentence. You read, and then you click the next part and then emphasize that the one in blue over here, of course you read, and then you emphasize that the one in blue over here is the idea, and that the yellow part is the elaboration. Emphasize that not all the time an idea always comes after the elaboration, because like in this case, there's only one sentence for both the idea and the elaboration. It is therefore possible that an elaboration can come ahead of an idea. In this case, the word because is used to emphasize why people nowadays have a more sedentary lifestyle as a result of the internet. Now, what follows after is another elaboration. There is an example here indicating a situation in which this sedentary lifestyle is true and is indeed an effect of the use of the internet. Now, you continue reading the next part. You emphasize that this is the other idea, the other negative of the internet, and that the last part over here is the elaboration. Now, this is the outcome of the slide presentation after you have read everything. Emphasize that this is the TIE method, and that when the writer now would proceed to the third paragraph discussing the second question, how can they be resolved, meaning these problems over here, the same TIE method is also at work. Now, since the purpose of this paragraph is to emphasize the negatives, your goal now as a teacher is to direct them to the yellow parts over here, which indicate the elaboration. All right. Now, what you can do is emphasize that there are actually a number of ways in which they can develop their ideas, because sometimes one issue students encounter is they have an idea but they seem to not know how to go on from there, or that in many instances they only have one idea and therefore as a result they have a very short paragraph. And so the goal of the discussion tonight, or for this particular session, is principally to teach them how to be able to expand their thoughts so that even if they have only one idea, they can still produce a reasonably long paragraph. And so from here, I'd like you to write on the board this particular text, ways to elaborate ideas, and then tell them ahead of time that there are actually 5 ways in which these ideas can be expanded. One way is by explanation, the other is by an example, the other by is an effect, and the other a procedure, and another is a combination. Now, you won't explain yet what each of these means. Instead, what you do, as soon as you have flashed or have written these words on the board, please do some board work here so that there is some variety in what you do as a teacher. You, you now direct them to the book, that's page 79 over here, and let them read each of these short paragraphs over here. Now, notice there's this blank space at the top of each paragraph here. This is the space where they would put the label as regards what method is used in expanding the ideas for each of these short paragraphs over here. Okay, so you might want to guide them first. For example, you can read this yourself and then ask them, so what exactly is this manner of elaboration here? So from among the 5 methods that you have flashed or written on the board, this is a procedure. How, a process, how it is done. You emphasize that in this case the word by is used, and this particular statement emphasizes how exactly can parents contribute and how can they protect them from the dangers of the internet. All right, so you write here, or they write here the word procedure or process, and then afterwards you let them be for the other 4 items. Now you give them about a maximum 3 to 4 minutes for the set. Then afterwards you answer the items one by one. Now, before, however, you move on to the next set over here, I'd like you to first ask the student what besides by can be used to indicate a procedure or a process. For that case, I'd like you to write down the words that are found over here. Okay, so eventually this will be written by you one by one, and emphasize that simply by using keywords, they can actually help trigger the ideas, because we know that these expressions over here function as transitional devices. But the thing is, we can actually also use them as trigger words, meaning by just using the word by, they are encouraged, or the idea that would be used followed by the word by is triggered as a result. And so you let them know that if in case they run out of ideas, they just think of a keyword and just think of how they can expand that idea from there on. So for each of the items here, you write down some expressions, some keywords. The order, by the way, of these words over here, in which you will write them, I mean, would follow also the order of answers here. So for example, this is a procedure, so you write by through here in number 4. Don't forget to leave lots of space, in between these words over here at the beginning, so that you have some space in which you can write these keywords. Note also the coding, the color codes. We always want to make certain texts or words stand out on the board, so even the color combination is somewhat of importance. Now, this paragraph over here uses the words as an effect, so clearly this is an effect. So what besides as an effect they can use? You can ask them for some keywords. So some would say therefore, or some of the words over here. You simply add to those words that they haven't mentioned. All right. The third example over here is an example. So again, you write some more words for example over here. The fourth example over here is an explanation because of the word because. and then you go back to the board and then write other words for because, and then this one over here is clearly a combination. Now you might want to ask them what combination of manners of elaborating are done here. So in this case we have, since the words for instance, we have clearly an example, and then the word hence, which indicates an effect. Okay, so at the end of everything, you should be able to have, this all of these texts written on the board, and then you ask them to copy the keywords as you write them. They can write the keywords if they wish, just around or maybe below the headings, the titles over here, so that they can always refer to these words eventually. Okay, so that's for the input. That is how you introduce to them the concept. Now you direct them to the next page, the drill page over here, page 80. Now you'd want them now to be able to apply the thing they have just learned, and let them read the idea, the topic sentence, and the idea that's been given over here. So the topic sentence is congestion in major cities worldwide can be attributed to a number of factors. The next sentence is clearly an idea because of the words for one. And so what they now do is expand or elaborate that idea using the blank space over here. Now, numbers 1, 2, and 3 all have the exact same topic sentence and idea. However, if they take a look at the words in bracket here at the end of each item, these words indicate the manner in which they should be able to expand those thoughts. And so you guide them here. For example, after you read number 1, ask them, why are more and more people moving to these already crowded cities? So let them explain, and then direct them again to the board using the words that you have written earlier. Ask them why, and then perhaps you can have some sort of discussion, and then let them write down those thoughts over here. Then you move on to number 2. You do this before they write, by the way, so you go through all of the 3 items first. Examples, so you might want to guide them, what kinds of people, what examples of people move into these cities? So they might want to say workers, students, or travelers, for example. So that's the case. But since it's move, then it's something that's permanent. So maybe, or maybe long term, maybe we could talk about workers, families, students here. Number 3 asks for an effect. So what's the effect if more and more people move into these already crowded cities? Now, you might want to emphasize that the effect can be a negative or a positive or both. But you might want to ask them, so if a city is already crowded and more people get into these crowded cities, what could be the effect? So you guide them, and then from there you let them write. This should be for about 7 to 10 minutes altogether. Then afterwards, you ask them for their answers, you comment on their answers, praise if necessary, correct if need be, and even before the minute or the time is up, you go around, move around, and check their work, do some editing if you need to, and see if they need some help in some sentence construction and also some idea development. All right. Now, once you're done with this part over here, you go back to the slides. And that is because you would want to ask them or direct them again to the slide over here and ask them what exactly did the writer use for this part, say, of the paragraph. So again, direct them to the keywords. Since there's the word because here, so apparently for this one idea, some explanation is used. For this part over here, the words for example are there, so clearly it's an example. And in the third part over here, the word effect is here, so clearly this is the outcome of the sedentary lifestyle, so this is an effect. Now, emphasize to them before you move on to the next part that clearly in this example, the writer did not limit himself to just one way of elaborating. And apparently, he uses here a combination. Now, this particular example is significant because this will be a jumping board to your next drill after you have presented this part over here, which clearly shows some reason altogether. Okay, so your uh, that's your slide. Now, once you're done with this part over here, let them know that they can actually have a paragraph even if there's only one idea they have in mind. And so you want to show them another example of a different topic using three methods over here. So say we have this topic sentence or the idea, pet ownership can be helpful to communities. And so to explain why pet ownership can be helpful, they could use again the keyword because. So you read this to them. If this sentence has to be expanded by way of an example, again, they can use for example or for instance, like what we have over here. And then if they want to indicate an effect, they could use again the words on the board, just like through it over here, or even the words consequently or as a result. And this is the effect. So please read this. And then emphasize that since these three elaboration sentences all point to one and the same idea, they can actually create a paragraph by combining all of these three elaboration sentences all together, just like what they had in the previous example. So here now is the resulting paragraph. So you read each of the part over here, and then once you're done, emphasize that from a singular idea, they have already produced 62 words. Now imagine if the writer adds another benefit here of pet ownership besides being helpful to communities. They could actually lengthen their paragraph altogether. And so this is an example of how powerful keywords can be, because these keywords over here again trigger ideas. They can actually use them to create some sort of like a skeleton of a paragraph if they want to be able to expand their ideas. Now, for them to appreciate this, please direct them to the their handout over here. But even before they do this, show to them how the combination of these three ideas could result in a paragraph that discusses the same question over here. So take a look at this slide. You can flash them. So this is the topic sentence and the idea, and this is the explanation. This is an example, and this is the result. So you read this to them. Now this paragraph already has 113 words, which is more than enough for a paragraph they can create in the actual test. And so let this paragraph, inspire them or guide them on what to do next, because their final drill is going to create a paragraph that uses the text that's found at the bottom of page 80. So the topic sentence is, the internet is undoubtedly becoming the main tool for people to connect with the rest of the world. And the idea is that there are social networking sites that are very popular means of connecting with friends and relatives. Now, you can guide them by, again, direct them to the keywords. For example, they can start with, this is because. And then somewhere in the middle, you could write, for example. And then at the end, you can write, say the word consequently or as a result. So that should be able to guide them in developing their whole paragraph. Now, you give them about 10 minutes to be able to complete this part over here. And then tell them also that once they're done completing the whole paragraph, that they also count the number of words they have produced, including the ones that are here already. Now, if they are able to reach at least 80 words, that's good enough already, all right? And if they can go like 100, then better. So 10 minutes, that's the time you give them to complete this. And again, just like what we did earlier over here, you move around, check the work, edit if necessary, praise for some good job done. And then afterwards, you may now present some example over here. I think this is the one. Yep. And then afterwards, you emphasize to them that there can actually be different ways of presenting the ideas. For example, in this last slide over here, they might find that the example precedes the explanation, and then there's another example, and then there's an effect that follows at the end. Okay. This is a different example, by the way, but this is to just emphasize that regardless of the topic, they can actually make use of these different ways of elaborating, using again some trigger words to create any paragraph in the body of their essay. Okay, so that should last for about 10 minutes, no, for an hour. I mean, that's from 7:30 to 8:30, and then afterwards, your reading or your writing discussion is done.